All right. Good morning, David, and welcome to another edition of Spiritual Reflections.
Morning.
And yeah, it's a Wednesday. Instead of Randall had another obligation today, so I'm stepping in for today. You've been talking for a while now about Gnosticism, and there's a lot of words in Gnosticism that are kind of new to people. So I think you're planning to take a little time to kind of raise the vibration of our vocabulary, so to speak, so we have a better understanding of maybe what when you say words like demiurge and archon and monad, what does all that mean? So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, we all know that it's consciousness that is evolving right now. Consciousness is the driving evolution. For many, many years, however long you believe, uh, we we had to evolve physically and consciously to get to the point in which we became a conscious human being. So consciousness itself is a kind of a new thing,
Hmm.
but it's been evolving uh, very quickly recently in the last many decades. Now, as consciousness is raising, our language should be matching or changing to it. And we're kind of stuck with some good ideas that are new and evolutionary, but our language is still reflecting some of the lower consciousness that we were in. So today in the class, we're going to be dealing with kind of updating some of our words to match more of the consciousness that's coming through right now for us. Uh, we we we've taught that we're I, we've taught that we're kind of made full circle, I guess is what I want to say. In other words, we're completing this 3D experience that we've been in for at least over 200,000 years or more as we moved into Homo sapiens sapien, which means more enlightened human.
Hmm.
For that, we were kind of living out of our nervous system. We were living in reaction mode. We were
Right.
kind of living basically on survival of the species. And now consciousness is really showing up big right now. And there's an acceleration of that consciousness as things are changing so fast. So, are we changing with it? I guess is what I'm saying. So, today we're going to look at some words that were being used in the pre Christian times, which really takes us back to only the third or fourth century. Up until then, there was a completely different language that was going on among those that are labeled or called the Gnostics. And all that means is these people were not seeking to know creator, God, whatever you choose to call it, through an institution, not through a priesthood or a ministry, but they were looking for direct knowledge. And of course, religion stepped in and said, no, you got to come through us. So most of what we know about spirituality and God has been filtered through a lot of religion. And now that people are kind of fulfilling that religious part of their journey and becoming more spiritual, well, we're kind of going back and picking up what we have lost on the path. And that is the early language of the early, we can say early Christians, but it was Christianity before Christianity was actually.
Right. There was a whole movement called Gnosticism, which was kind of a collection of thoughts. And so some of the terminology that you're using is from that time before Christianity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So let's take God, for instance. The word God has a beginning,
Right.
and that which is God has no beginning. Let's put it that way. We're talking about the infinite. The infinite has no beginning and no end. It had no birth and no death. Now, there's a place in the Bible that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So that means that when we started knowing this invisible entity, this field, or whatever you want to call it, had a beginning in the word God.
Hmm.
So as people are kind of gone through the God thing now, they're kind of asking, well, then if it's not God, God, then what is it? And I think we have to go back to the Gnostics to really find out what the pre-language was before Christianity took it over.
Right. Because you've taught that God is a man-made word, came from the German word gut, etc. Yeah.
Right, which means
Right.
good. Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of a form of raising our vibration, but we're doing it with the idea of the consciousness and our vocabulary and what
Correct.
kind of upgrading our terms, so to speak, so we can communicate better because God has such a cultural attachment to it.
And a lot of baggage to it, really, when you think about
Yeah.
all the different Christian churches and denominations that teach out of the same book, the Bible, and they use the term God, but they're all seeing it through
The
the
lens of
blinders of what their dogma and
yeah.
doctrine is.
Right.
So we're kind of taking away the dogma and the doctrine, and we're going behind the so-called veil of
There you go.
illusion and
Yeah.
misinformation. We're coming back to our individual right to know what it is for ourselves, or direct knowledge, or gnosis that it's
Right.
called.
I don't want to open up a whole can of worms because we've only got about another 3 or 4 minutes here because we try to do these in 9 minute segments and then invite people to the larger class. But you've mentioned the idea of is there are there two gods? Is there one God and but they got half got separated off somehow through miscreation or misthinking or what's kind of the idea there?
Well, that's going to be our dive in starting the class today. We're going to dive in deeper to what you just brought up right there.
Hmm.
A lot of people believe God is one thing. If you do, then you have to understand that it's a part of God that man in its unenlightened state has made an image of God.
Oh,
In other words, the true creator created us, and then we return the compliment by creating it.
or
And that's in the
miscreating it.
Bible. Yeah, we're going to actually dive into Romans 1 and see how that we changed the
Hmm.
invisible, incorruptible God into a corruptible God. In other words, the old man in the sky kind of philosophy or theology that
Right.
has been around for a long time.
That kind of that starts touching into the three covenants that you teach on. There's videos on that within the academy. The Old Testament, New Testament, and then the newer higher consciousness 5D covenant, whatever terminology you want to use.
Mhm.
Exactly. All right. Well, anything else you want to share on this concept? To kind of wet their whistle, so to speak, for today's class at 11. Then I'll tell them how they can find that.
Well, in my personal experience in the late 80s, I kind of came to the end of what I thought God was, but it wasn't God. It was my belief in God that changed.
Right.
And I kind of ran out of beliefs. I went from this perception to that perception to another perception till I ran out of perception completely. And you want to run out of perception because perceptions are just perceiving something without the experience of the thing you're perceiving.
Right.
So as I began to really experience what I thought God was, the infinite, I ran out of words, labels, and titles and just had an experience. I didn't have a word for it. I just had an experience of that God was in my life. It changed my whole path. It changed my ministry. It changed how I saw things, how I saw myself, how I saw the world. And I just feel there's others out there that's at the crossroad, and we're going to help them by beginning today with the class. And we're going to kind of go back to some of the words that religion got rid of in the first and second centuries and pick those words up again and see that if those words are more going to connect us to the experience of gnosis so we can have that
Direct
personal
knowledge.
experience.
Yeah, direct knowledge, exactly. Um, just real quick, I know just to clarify, that idea of losing God and totally upending your world, that was not an easy process.
Yeah, there's a place that says he who loses his soul shall find it.
Yeah,
Sometimes you have to lose what you think something is to find
right.
what it is. And I think there's people out there wondering, what does it all mean now? I've kind of run out of the dogma and doctrine and the religion I was born with or raised in. And
Right.
I think this is where some of us are stepping up to help people to cross over into gnosis and really have the experience that we're really longing for. We're not longing for another philosophy, another religion. We're longing for an experience.
There you go. Excellent. All right. If you'd like to dive into this with us, the class he's speaking of happens every Wednesday at Heartlight Spiritual Center, where David is also the spiritual guide there, as well as the academy here. That happens at 11 o'clock Eastern Time each Wednesday, and it is can be found at heartlightcharlotte.org. charlotte.org. And the minute the class is over, the recording is available. So you can go back and see previous recordings on that website. And then that website, there's 90 days worth on the website. And then if you click down below on the YouTube channel, there are years worth. So plenty of things for you to dive into. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you there. Thanks for joining us today for Spiritual Reflections, a 9-minute kind of a soundbite right into what's going to happen at the Wednesday class today. So thanks for joining us, David, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.